model that we've seen in other administrations and you think may exist here with this administration. I just want to look at the gentleman before me was just talking about the way the Justice Department ran the investigation into Hunter Biden. And some of the things we've learned from the whistleblowers were they were prevented from taking certain investigative steps. They couldn't interview the adult grandchildren of the president. They couldn't execute a search warrant on a storage unit without first tipping off the defense counsel. They couldn't use, in interviews they got to do, only a couple, they couldn't use the term big guy. They couldn't look at political figure one, which we know is the big guy, is Joe Biden. They couldn't investigate tax years 2014 and 2015 because they let the they couldn't charge for that, I should say, because they let the statute of limitations expire. Is it an abuse of power when the Biden Justice Department stops investigative steps that all potentially lead to Joe Biden?
It certainly can be if there's a linkage to the president. If you look back, I think Article 2 of the Nixon impeachment was an abuse of power provision that dealt with that type of nexus. Article 1, I think, of the Trump impeachment, I think, dealt with that type of nexus. So you just have to establish those linkages as you go forward in an inquiry to make an article of, to substantiate an article of impeachment.
I want you to elaborate on something you said earlier, too. I wrote it down. You said confirmed corrupt influence peddling operation. Can you elaborate on what you think that entails? That's pretty strong words. That you said the Biden influence peddling scheme was confirmed corrupt influence peddling operation.
I think that it's now, in my view at least, largely unassailable. Even people that have long been critical of some of the investigations have acknowledged recently, particularly after the Archer interview, that this was an influence peddling effort. Whether it was an illusion or not is part of the task for the inquiry. But it seems to me abundantly clear from these emails and statements and now sworn testimony that Hunter Biden and his associates were selling access to Joe Biden. And the question is whether any of that effort resulted in decisions and changes being made by Joe Biden, and also the degree to which he knew of it, directed it, encouraged it. That's all the subject of an inquiry that has to be determined. It can be disproven or proven, but that's what lays ahead of you.
Yeah. I yield back to the gentleman. Appreciate the gentleman for yielding.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, now recognize Ms. Porter from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Comer. Mr. Dubinsky, do you believe that this impeachment inquiry has merit?
Again, I'm not a legal scholar. I'm a forensic accountant. I think from what I've seen, there's merit for the inquiry to look for other information now.
Okay, so I'm going to say yes, you believe the impeachment inquiry has merit.
Yes.
Ms. O'Connor, do you believe this impeachment inquiry is legitimate?
I don't know enough about the House rules and how things are supposed to work here to know whether it is or not.
Okay. Mr. Turley, do you agree? Do you think this impeachment inquiry has merit or is legitimate?
I do. I think that the House has passed the threshold for an inquiry. That's separate from the question of the articles of impeachment.
Thank you very much. A veteran of several impeachments said that an impeachment inquiry without a floor vote by the Congress would, quote, create a process completely devoid of any merit or legitimacy. Mr. Dubinsky, who said that?
I don't know.
Ms. O'Connor, who said this?
No clue.
Mr. Turley, who said this?
I made an objection along those lines to the earlier decision from Speaker Pelosi to go forward without a House vote, and I've made the same objection today, that I think the best practices in going forward is to do that. And what I've said in my testimony is that it's not required under the Constitution.
Correct. Professor Turley, could be my time. I agree with you. We're not talking about whether it's required legally. I'm just asking you, can you say again for the committee, do you know who made this statement, and if so, who?
I don't. I've made an objection along those lines.
Look, could be my time. This quote is a statement from now Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Dubinsky, do you know the date of the House floor vote on this impeachment inquiry?
No, I don't think there was a House floor vote.
Ms. O'Connor, do you remember any House vote?
I have not been following that.
Professor Turley, was there a House vote on this impeachment inquiry?
And not that I know of.
So this House vote didn't happen. There has not been a House vote to move forward with this impeachment inquiry. So we haven't followed what the Speaker himself, Mr. McCarthy, has said is the process that we should be following so that an impeachment inquiry would have merit or legitimacy, which is something that I think all Americans on both sides of the aisle should expect investigations or inquiries like this to have. I think Americans should be able to expect that the things we do in this body have merit or legitimacy. Today, by having this hearing, Republicans have changed their tune. I think I know why Speaker McCarthy is going back on his conviction. His members are demanding an impeachment, but their months and months of investigating our president have not revealed yet any evidence that he himself has committed crimes. But Speaker McCarthy wants to keep his job, so he is set on delivering an impeachment inquiry, whether or not there is any evidence, and even if, in his own words, that impeachment inquiry would be devoid of any merit or legitimacy. Mr. Dubinsky, I have one final question. What is the title of this hearing?
The title was "The Basis for an Impeachment Inquiry of President Joseph Biden."
But according to Speaker McCarthy, there isn't a legitimate or meritorious basis yet for this hearing. And no amount of noise on the other side of the aisle is going to change this. As Speaker McCarthy said, in his words, this impeachment inquiry is devoid of any merit or legitimacy. Wow, I just did it. At the very end of an extremely contentious hearing, I found something that Speaker McCarthy was correct about. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and I believe...
Point of, I just have a unanimous consent request.
Okay.
Thank you. I request to submit to the record a Washington Post fact check that pointed out that the committee Republicans' own memo fails to support the claim about shell companies. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a point.
Without objection.
Mr.
So
Chair,
ordered.
I'm so
I
sorry.
don't. Okay, Ms.
Yeah.
Tlaib.
I just want to submit for the record, if I may, article from Augusta Chronicle says government shutdown, Georgia military service members will see no pay.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Biden had dinner with Hunter and his business associates, including Yelena Baturina, a Russian tech and energy oligarch who was married to the mayor of Moscow at the time. Hunter then received $3.5 million in payouts from Baturina. She was not sanctioned after the invasion of Crimea. Joe Biden has maintained for years that he was not involved in his son's business dealings. Yet we have proof that Joe Biden attended business dinners with his son while he was Vice President of the United States of America. Here you have an excerpt from Devin Archer's transcribed interview. On the screen, if we could get that up there. During his interview, Archer testified to the fact that on multiple occasions, then Vice President Joe Biden attended functions with business associates of his and Hunter Biden. One such example is laid out on the screen for us. Mr. Archer is explaining here that in the spring of 2014, if we could get this slide up, Devin and Hunter had dinner at Cafe Milano with several of their business associates. One of these attendees was Yelena Baturina. Ms. Baturina was, at the time, the richest woman in Russia, and she was married to the former mayor of Moscow, as previously stated. Interestingly, on February 14th, 2014, Ms. Baturina wired Hunter Biden and Devin Archer $3.5 million. It is still uncertain what legitimate service Hunter Biden provided to Ms. Baturina in exchange for this large sum of money, if any at all. Furthermore, it is concerning how Hunter Biden and Devin Archer moved this money from bank account to bank account. And it is also convenient that the U.S. government never placed Ms. Baturina on their public sanctions lists after Russia invaded Crimea. This billionaire continued to invade public sanctions lists even after Russia invaded Ukraine. I want these facts to be clear to the American people. The billionaire continued to evade the public sanctions lists after Russia invaded Ukraine. Joe Biden's attendance at this dinner shows that Joe Biden's involvement in Hunter Biden's deals was more than just the illusion of access. It was access. There were direct benefits leading to Hunter and his business partners after Joe's attendance at this Cafe Milano dinner. This pay-to-play type of engagement was selling direct access to Joe Biden and the office of the Vice President of the United States. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter to the record the third bank records memorandum produced by this committee on Oversight and Accountability on August 9th, 2023.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Turley, as an expert on constitutional issues and impeachment, where does selling access to an executive office fall in terms of what justifies an impeachment inquiry, and what is deemed an impeachable offense?
Well, it's two separate questions. What I've suggested is for the four areas for articles of impeachment that you can explore, you can look at some of the criminal code, and that includes things like bribery under 201, Hobbs, the Hobbs Act cases, and those have different standards that I think are relevant. In terms of the impeachable standard itself, there's been obviously decades of debate about that. I would hope that there would be general agreement that public corruption, if the president engaged
Selling any access.
right, if
Yes.
if he engaged in public corruption involved
Any sort of peddling of influence. Now, as a follow-up, in previous impeachment inquiries, have actions such as influence peddling and pay-to-play schemes like this been deemed as offensive to the conscience of the American people in such a way to warrant an investigation?
Well, I think that there's certainly a basis for this inquiry to go forward. My position is simply that this is early on in an inquiry in terms of linking these, which are still just allegations, to the president, and that's the linkage you have to establish.
Thank you, Mr. Turley. It is far time for Joe Biden to stop lying to the American people about his shady foreign business deals. He intentionally misled the American people by using complex maneuvers to pocket millions of dollars from our adversary. He lied when he was vice president. He lied as a candidate to gain the office of President of the United States. Now this committee has uncovered the truth, and it is time to impeach this compromise commander-in-chief. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Get a lady yields back.
Chairman, point of order, if I could. I didn't want to interrupt the good gentlelady from Colorado, but you cannot engage in personalities against the President of the United
We've
States.
established that, Mr. Ranking Member.
Okay, and so you cannot say that Joe Biden lied. First of all, he didn't lie.
Mr.
but
Ranking Member,
even if
we've
he had,
established
you
that at the
can't
beginning of the
say it.
hearing.
You can't say it, Mr. Chairman. I hope you
This
agree
is-
with me.
this
You
is-
can't rule as a
this is-
parliamentarian.
This is.
I can provide you all the
Thank you, Mr.
cases.
This
Chair.
is this.
I have a
Reclaiming order. Chair now recognizes Mr. Ivy.
I have a unanimous consent motion before Mr.
Yes,
Ivy goes.
Mr. Goldman.
I would like to reintroduce once again the Devin Archer transcript and especially point to when he says
Look,
that Hunter
Mr.
Biden
Goldman,
was
Mr.
not
Goldman,
involved
we've re-entered
in
it.
the Elena
This will be the fifth
Ballerina
time.
$3.5
Without
billion.
objection, we've re-entered the Devin Archer transcript for the fifth time. Now, Chair recognizes Mr. Ivy from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance to let me weigh in today. Because it's such an important hearing. Mr. Turley, it's good to see you again. You should get office space here on the Hill, I think. This is our third or fourth committee hearing together. I do want to say this. Impeachment is one of the greatest powers that the Constitution gives to the House of Representatives. And I think it's important to make sure that we treat it with that level of esteem. But I think what's going on, or has gone on here in the House for several months now, is that power has been abused. And kicking off this hearing today, and I appreciate that the word probably used most today is if, because a lot of these statements are made in the forms of allegations, but With respect to connecting them to the president, that hasn't happened. There's a lot of, well, if this is true, then that. And I don't think that's sufficient to move forward at this point. I appreciate Mr. Turley's comment. I think you were saying before Ms. Boebert cut you off that it was early and that, you know, Mr. Biden hadn't been linked at this point. I think that's true. He hasn't been linked to any of these allegations that have been raised. I did want to talk about a couple of them specifically. With respect to the prosecutor issue, the removal of Prosecutor General Shokin, a couple of points I want to make on that front. Key one, I think, is that the removal of Shokin was actually detrimental to Hunter Biden and Burisma, because it was pretty clear based on statements and testimony that's been given here in the House before these committees and in other instances that he was not doing a great job, to say the least. He was sitting on the investigation. He wasn't moving it forward. I think there have been statements that have been made with respect to the IMF pressuring to have him removed by threatening to withhold $40 billion in international assistance unless he was removed. President Biden's request to have him removed along those lines was actually consistent not only with what he pushed for, or the IMF pushed for, but what others were pushing for as well, including Senator Johnson, I believe, on that front. So what we've got here is an effort to argue by our Republican colleagues that the removal of this prosecutor, or President Biden asking or you know, pressing to have him removed, was in some way an effort to undermine an investigation for Burisma. But it's pretty clear, I think, based on, again, the testimony that we've received and that's been presented in Congress before and published in some of our documents, that that's the exact opposite. Things were moving forward, not moving forward with him there. They were more likely to move forward without him. And so there's really no linkage there between the president and derailing any kind of investigation. With respect to the Devin Archer statements, Devin Archer said he's confirmed that over his decade-long business relationship with Hunter Biden, he never heard Hunter Biden discuss business with his father, either on phone calls or in person. And I did want to add this as well. Mr. Biden's bookkeeper, Eric Schwerin, from 2009 to 2018, he was his bookkeeper, had access to his bank account, said that he had no knowledge of President Biden having any involvement in Hunter Biden's financial activities. With respect to the Weiss issue, and I know that's been an issue that's been pushed a lot too, that argument is that as you know, Weiss was derailing the investigation into Hunter Biden and slowing it down. You know, the key points on that obviously are the fact that Weiss was appointed by President Trump, and as Congressman Buck said a few days ago over in the Judiciary Committee hearings, if the president had removed Weiss when he first came into office, Republicans would have argued that that was an effort to derail the investigation against Hunter Biden. In fact, when the Attorney General testified, he noted that he had Senate Republicans who explicitly wanted him and sort of pressed for in their personal meetings that he promised not to remove Weiss or replace him. And we've had other testimony with respect to the FBI supervisors, the special agent who was in the SAC for the investigation, working with Mr. Weiss. Question, have you ever known U.S. Attorney Weiss to make prosecutorial decisions based upon political influence? Answer, no. Have you ever known any of the AUSAs in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Office of Delaware to let their prosecutorial decisions be guided by political interference? Answer, no. So I apologize for running over, but
Gentlemen, time's expired.